Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Wednesday, April 5th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, a new $2.6 billion weapons package for Ukraine. So the Biden administration announced on Tuesday a new weapons package for Ukraine that includes HIMARS ammunition, missiles for air defenses, artillery rounds, and all sorts of other types of equipment. So the package is $2.6 billion, pretty huge. It includes $500 million in the Presidential Drawdown Authority. So that means the $500 million in weapons can be shipped to Ukraine right away, pulled from Pentagon stockpiles. And then the other 2.1 billion will go toward purchasing new equipment for Kiev that could take months or years to deliver. And this is under a program known as the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. And so the money is still being drawn from the $45 billion Ukraine aid bill that Congress passed back in December. That's what they're still pulling from. They're still spending that. I believe they're expecting it to last until the summer. And so far, the US has authorized about $113 billion to spend on the war. So, according to the Pentagon, the drawdown authority package includes the following. So, this is again the weapons that they're going to ship right over there. It's mostly ammunition. I'm not going to read all of it. These are pretty long lists. They're sending a lot of stuff here. But the big things here, it's additional munitions for the Patriot air defense systems, which Ukraine recently finished training on. Ukrainians were in the U.S. training how to use the Patriot missile systems, additional ammunition for the HIMARS rocket systems, lots of artillery rounds, mortar rounds. It doesn't say how much of this ammunition they're sending, just specifies what type. Also, 400 grenade launchers, 11 tactical vehicles, testing equipment, some trucks, spare parts, a lot of things. And then when it comes to the equipment that they're going to be purchasing for Ukraine under that Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, it is a lot of stuff. Again, mostly ammunition, including ammunition for the National Advanced Surface to Air Missile, the NASAMS. That is a type of air defense system. And then again, just lots of ammunition, artillery rounds, mortar rounds, things like that, small arms, anti-armor rockets, javelin anti-armor systems, just a whole bunch of stuff. So this shows, I think, that the Biden administration is still planning this long-term support because, again, a lot of this stuff won't be delivered for a long time. So the new package comes as the U.S. is hoping that Ukraine will carry out a counteroffensive to regain more territory this spring. But comments from Zelensky and other Ukrainian officials have cast doubt on Kiev's ability to launch an assault. And another big point here is that it's also not clear if the US and other Western support is sustainable, as Ukraine has been using a massive amount of artillery ammunition in its battle defending Bakhmut. Last month, a Pentagon official told the New York Times that upcoming ammunition shipments, the ones that were going to be announced over the next few weeks, so that includes this one, were part of a last ditch effort to help Ukraine on the battlefield as Ukrainian forces are using artillery rounds at an unsustainable rate. So, also on Tuesday, the Pentagon released a fact sheet of all the weapons and ammunition that they have sent Ukraine since Russia launched the invasion. And it is a very extensive list. And just to show how much ammunition they're burning through, specifically the 155 millimeter artillery rounds, the U.S. has pledged over 1.5 million of these rounds for Ukraine and lots of other types of ammunition on top of that. Just really goes to show how much the U.S. has been sending. All right, the next one here. Top Republican says support for arming Ukraine is overwhelming. So this is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So the House Intelligence Committee Chairman Mike Turner, he's a Republican from Ohio. He traveled to Ukraine on Monday and claimed that there remains overwhelming congressional support for providing Kiev with military aid. Unfortunately, I think he's probably right. So during his remarks in Kiev, Turner acknowledged that there is a minority in both parties that desire a debate over further aid to Ukraine. However, he said, quote, overwhelmingly, there is support for continuing aid to Ukraine so that they can continue to fight against this aggression of Russia, end quote. Unfortunately, he said there's a small minority in both parties, but I haven't really seen much or any dissent from Democrats in Congress. So in January, CIA Director William Burns traveled to Kiev and warned Zelensky that at some point aid will be harder to come by. So that is a message that the White House has been conveying to Ukraine, sort of contradicting what Turner is saying. They're saying they don't think they could get these huge aid packages for Ukraine anymore. And Ukrainian officials actually think that that might mean that they're trying to use Congress as an excuse to wind down aid, because then they talk to people in Congress and they're saying, oh, don't worry about it. We're going to keep the aid spigot flowing. So Turner made the trip to Ukraine with three other members of Congress: Chris Stewart, Republican from Utah; Rich McCormick, Republican from Georgia; and Darren LaHood, a Republican from Illinois. Stewart claimed that most Americans will support arming Kiev for the long term. He explained, quote, most conflicts such as this between nation states take time to resolve themselves. I think the American people understand that. As long as they feel like progress is being made, over being careful with the money and being thoughtful how we involve U.S. resources, end quote. Another person that appeared in Ukraine on Monday was Mike Pompeo, the former Secretary of State and former CIA director. He was there saying, we got to keep supporting Ukraine. Looks like he's going to run for president. I don't think he's going to get very far. He's not charismatic. I don't think people like him. And he's a total, neocon, has a neocon foreign policy, and is very open about it. All right. So the next one here, the first batch of Polish MiG-29 fighter jets arrive in Ukraine. So a Polish official said Monday that Warsaw had delivered its first batch of Soviet-made MiG-29 fighter jets to Ukraine. They said that a few MiGs have gotten there and they're expected to send a few more. It's not clear exactly how many Poland is going to give Ukraine. When they first announced it, they said they would give them 4 MiG-29s in the initial delivery, and then they're going to send more after that. So we don't know exactly how many are going to be sent over there. And Poland was the first NATO member to pledge to send fighter jets to Ukraine, which of course marks an escalation of the alliance's support for Kiev. And Slovakia followed Poland. They said that they delivered the first 4 of 13 MiG-29s that they promised to Ukraine on March 23rd. So their MiGs are arriving. And just the context, last year, Poland tried to send its MiGs to Ukraine via the United States. They wanted the U.S. to make the delivery, but the U.S. said no. The Pentagon said no. They said, nope, we don't, it could, escalate the war. Russia could view this as NATO directly entering the war, but of course now they don't care anymore about escalation or these risks. And the U.S. must have been involved in these decisions because they have offered Slovakia a $660 million reward for sending the MiGs to Ukraine. They want to finance a major attack helicopter deal for Slovakia that's worth about $1 billion. And the U.S. is saying, we'll cover $660 million. And then the EU is going to give them over $200 million in cash. So together, it almost has this big deal covered. Not sure yet if Slovakia has accepted this offer or if there's something else they might want to buy. All right, the next one here, this is from Declassified UK, and it says a significant portion of the 4.8 billion pounds in lethal aid that the UK has sent to Ukraine will remain secret. So according to the Ministry of Defense, Britain's Ministry of Defense told Parliament that a significant proportion of our lethal aid for Ukraine is procured overseas and for both operational and commercial reasons. The detail of these contracts will not be published. So they're not saying, everything. They're not sharing with the public everything that they're sending Ukraine. And I think there's a good chance that the United States might be doing the same thing. So the announcement raises suspicion that Britain is sending more controversial weaponry to Ukraine that it does not want made public. Declassified first reported last week that the UK was sending ammunition containing depleted uranium to Ukraine. So that was 2 weeks ago now that they reported this. This article's from March 30th. And Putin, of course, responded by announcing that he would station tactical nuclear weapons in neighboring Belarus. So the British Ministry of Defense said that the only contracts it will publish will be those with British companies for equipment replenishing existing stockpiles. It's unclear which foreign governments the government which foreign companies the government does not want to reveal its contracts with or what weapon systems they are for. So the UK provided $2.4 billion pounds in military equipment to Ukraine in 2022, more than any country other than the US. And the US, I mean, it's over 30 billion just in military equipment alone that they're sending to Ukraine. So that's where we're at. And I think, again, this does raise a lot of questions when it comes to the U.S. support. I know there's a picture of Ukrainian, one of their intelligence outfits, and they had an American attack helicopter. I forget which model, and it was something that the U.S. has not said that they've sent Ukraine. So that made me think, oh, maybe they're sending a lot of things that we don't know about. All right, the next one here, the big news on Tuesday was that Finland formally joined NATO, doubling the alliance's border with Russia. So Finland formally became the 31st member of NATO on Tuesday, officially ending the country's post-World War II policy of neutrality and raising tensions between Helsinki and Moscow. So the Finnish presidency said in a statement, quote, Finland has today become a member of the defense alliance NATO. The era of military non-alignment in our history has come to an end. A new era begins, end quote. So Finland joining NATO was completed during a ceremony that was attended by Finland's Foreign Minister Pekka Haavisto, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General. So Finland joining NATO more than doubles the alliance's territory that borders Russia. Moscow has said it will respond by increasing its military presence in the region, and they will take more measures if other NATO countries start deploying military assets to Finnish territory. So who knows if Finnish officials might start asking for U.S. troops on their soil. Who knows where this is going to go? Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said in response to the news, quote, the Kremlin believes that this is another aggravation of the situation. The expansion of NATO is an infringement on our security and Russia's national interests, end quote. So a major motive for Putin's decision, of course, to invade Ukraine was NATO's post-Cold War expansion and the alliance's cooperation with Kiev following the 2014 coup that ousted Viktor Yanukovych. So at the ceremony, this is a very interesting quote from our Secretary of State, Blinken. He appears to say, he basically says that he's thankful that Putin invaded Ukraine because it motivated Finland to apply for NATO membership. Now, I'll read you this quote because, again, that seems like what he's saying. He didn't say that directly, but I don't know any other way to interpret this. Blinken said, quote, I'm tempted to say this is maybe the one thing that we can thank Mr. Putin for because he once again here precipitated something he claims to want to prevent by Russia's aggression, causing many countries to believe that they have to do more to look out for their own defense and to make sure that they can deter possible Russian aggression going forward, end quote. So he's saying, we have to thank Putin for Finland joining NATO, but that does imply we have to thank Putin for invading Ukraine. I mean, it's just really sick stuff. And this comes from the diplomat who hasn't tried any diplomacy to end this war in Ukraine. And leading up to the invasion of Ukraine, Russia presented a list of security guarantees that it sought from the U.S. Chief among them was a guarantee that Ukraine would never join NATO, but the Biden administration refused to engage on the issue. After the invasion, Derek Chollet, he is a counselor to Blinken, that's his position, counselor to the Secretary of State. He admitted in an interview that the administration made no effort to address Putin's concerns about Ukraine's possible NATO membership. He said it wasn't on the table. So Peskov said Tuesday that Finland joining NATO was not as provocative to Russia as Ukraine being granted membership. Peskov said, quote, the situation with Finland, of course, is radically different from the situation with Ukraine because, firstly, Finland has never had anti-Russian rhetoric, and we have had no disputes with Finland. With Ukraine, the situation is the opposite and potentially much more dangerous, end quote. So there it is, 31st member, and Sweden, who knows if Turkey's going to approve them. Hungary still has to approve them. That could still take a while, but Finland's the big one just because of that big border. The next one, I left up the one from yesterday about NATO officials not talking about the Nord Stream pipeline bombings. And then the next one here, former Israeli prime minister admits that Israel has nukes. So this was on Tuesday. Former Israeli prime minister Ehud Barak acknowledged that Israel has nuclear weapons in a now deleted tweet about concerns over the current Israeli government's judicial overhaul plans. So he wrote, quote, in conversations between Israelis and Western diplomatic officials, there are deep concerns raised of the possibility that if the coup in Israel succeeds, a messianic dictatorship that possesses nuclear weapons and fanatically wishes for a confrontation with Islam centered on the Temple Mount will be established in the heart of the Middle East, end quote. So there, he's saying, yeah, Israel has nukes and people are worried about it turning into a dictatorship if Israel's overhaul comes through. If Netanyahu's judicial overhaul goes through with. So Israel's nuclear arsenal is an open secret. Everybody knows that they have nukes, but Israeli officials and their U.S. counterparts do not acknowledge its existence. So you have Barak here. He says this, and then he deletes the tweet. He realizes, oh, whoops, I'm not supposed to say that. And because Israel does not declare its arsenal, it is not clear how many warheads they possess. I've seen estimates between 90 warheads and 300 warheads, and it could be higher than that. We don't know. And the US and Israel have long had an understanding concerning Israel's nukes, which were first developed in the late 1960s. Every US president since Richard Nixon agreed not to press Israel to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty in exchange for Israel not declaring its stockpile. The arrangement allows the US to keep providing aid to Israel, even though doing so is technically illegal. Under an amendment to the Arms Export Control Act, the U.S. cannot provide aid to a nuclear armed state that refuses to sign the NPT. So State Department spokesman Ned Price was recently asked about this, grilled about this by our friend Sam Husseini, who's a journalist who's been getting into the State Department press briefings and asking some tough questions. So when Price, was pressed about this issue about potential violations of the Arms Control Export Act and the State Department's refusal to acknowledge Israel's nuclear weapons program, Price referred Husseini to the Israeli government. He said, you should really ask them about this stuff. When Sam was asking about U.S. policy, U.S. laws, and them possibly being violated by the fact that Israel has this secret nuclear stockpile. So interesting to see it come to light and then be deleted. But the tweet was archived, so I linked to that. It's in Hebrew, but you could translate it. All right. So the next one here, Israeli forces storm the Al-Aqsa Mosque and assault worshippers. So Israeli forces have brutally assaulted dozens of Palestinian worshippers inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque in occupied East Jerusalem on Tuesday night and forcibly removed them from the site where they were peacefully observing the holy month of Ramadan. Dozens of heavily armed officers stormed the site before first firing tear gas and stun grenades into the prayer hall, where hundreds of men, women, elderly people, and children were staying overnight to pray. Some eyewitnesses said rubber-coated steel bullets were fired. So this is always something, to keep an eye on, because these raids on the Al-Aqsa Mosque can always spark, rocket attacks from Gaza, which can, spark another Gaza war, another serious Israeli bombing campaign in Gaza. But just in general, this violence just continues against Palestinians, and tensions remain really high. All right, let's see. The next one here, Moscow hosts a Syria Turkey meeting. So the deputy foreign ministers of Syria, Turkey, Iran, and Russia wrapped up 2 days of talks in Moscow on Tuesday that were aimed at working toward a normalization deal between Ankara and Damascus. So there's no sign that a breakthrough was made, but a follow-up meeting at the foreign minister level is expected to happen soon. A Turkish foreign ministry source told Russia's TASS news agency that the four sides agreed to continue consultations and are planning to hold a foreign ministers meeting. So Damascus has made clear that any normalization deal with Turkey hinges on a Turkish withdrawal from the territory that it occupies in northern Syria. And a normalization deal between Syria and Turkey would be a pretty huge deal. I mean, the Saudi Arabia one would be a big deal too, but Turkey would be a really big deal just because they're, occupying Syrian territory. They're still actively supporting these groups on the ground, although the Saudis could be supporting some of them too. I'm not sure. But we know that the Turks are, and they're there. So this would be a big deal if Syria and Turkey work out a deal here. And Russia definitely it's in their interests, but it's not in America's interest, of course. And the U.S. is discouraging all of this. But this is just the latest step. Again, it looks like the Saudis are going to normalize with Syria. They're going to invite them to the Arab League summit. That's going to be in May. This stuff hasn't been officially confirmed yet, but there's been a lot of reports about it. So a lot of things moving in this direction of these regional countries saying, all right, Assad's not going anywhere. Let's start talking to him and trading with his country again. All right, the next one here. Venezuela's opposition calls on Biden to ease sanctions. So Fernando Blassi, who is the new envoy for Venezuela's U.S.-backed opposition, is calling on the Biden administration to ease crippling sanctions on Venezuela, saying that not doing so could turn the country into another Cuba, which has been under a U.S. trade embargo since 1962. So Blassi said, quote, "If we continue down this path, Venezuela is destined to be another Cuba. It will become an issue for politicians in Florida to win elections. That would be an extremely sad destiny for a country," end quote. So Blassi said sanctions relief could provide much needed relief for ordinary Venezuelans, and it could incentivize President Nicolas Maduro to make concessions to the opposition related to the upcoming 2024 election. Blassi said, quote, "We have to begin now with a coherent plan whereby we give something and the government reciprocates," end quote. So Blassi's position is a departure from what the opposition wanted when it was led by Juan Guaido, who declared himself the interim president of Venezuela in January 2019. Guaido was backed by the U.S. and favored foreign intervention and crippling sanctions on his country, and that did lose him, what little support he had in the country. So at the end of 2022, the U.S.-backed opposition voted to remove Guaido as the interim president, and they dissolved the so-called interim government. And this government never had any real power besides being able to access some of Venezuela's offshore assets that the U.S. and its allies froze. And they also got the embassies in many U.S. and other Western countries. So the current sanctions on Venezuela were implemented by the Trump administration as part of its failed regime change effort. That was the idea of these sanctions and backing the coup. So far, the Biden administration has granted Chevron a limited license to start pumping oil in Venezuela, but they have not removed any other sanctions. So they haven't really done much to change this Trump administration policy, which basically put Venezuela under an embargo, besides letting Chevron pump some oil. That's all they've done. So we'll see if this gets them moving in another direction. All right, the last one here. Centcom says that a U.S. strike killed an ISIS leader in Syria. So U.S. Central Command has said that its forces launched a unilateral strike in Syria on Monday and claimed that it killed a senior ISIS leader. Centcom says the man's name was Khalid Eid Ahmad el-Jabouri and claimed that he was responsible for planning terrorist attacks in Europe and Turkey. The command said no civilians were harmed in the strike, but of course, as we know, the Pentagon is notorious for undercounting civilian casualties, especially in its airstrikes against ISIS. So according to the UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, the U.S. attack was a drone strike and it hit a target in the northwestern Syrian province of Idlib, which is mainly controlled by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, and that's an al-Qaeda-linked group. So also on Tuesday, Centcom released a summary of its operations against ISIS in Iraq and Syria in March. According to the command, it was involved in 9 partnered operations in Syria that killed a total of 2 ISIS operatives, or people that they claim were ISIS operatives, and they detained 11 more. So while the U.S. says that they say that their presence in Syria is about this fight against ISIS. They're always launching drone strikes and saying, "Oh, we killed another ISIS leader," and of course another one pops up and they kill them. It just seems like this never-ending thing. They're just picking off these people that they claim are these high-level ISIS leaders, but who knows who they are, exactly who they are. So they say this is why they're in Syria, but really it's about this campaign against Damascus and controlling the territory, controlling the oil. That's what it's about. It's very obvious. Um, and then in this article, I just mentioned, the recent escalations with the U.S. Bases coming under attack and the U.S. airstrikes. So Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he was recently in Syria, and while he was there, he said, "Staying here is worth the risk. It's worth risking getting Americans killed. It's worth risking a war with Russia. It's worth risking a war with Iran to fight ISIS." But it's just nonsense because Syria and their allies, Russia, Iran, other countries that operate there, like Turkey, they're none of them. They all fight ISIS. If the U.S. got out of the way, the Kurdish SDF that they back would make some kind of deal with Damascus, and they would all work together against ISIS. That's what would happen. So the U.S. is just in the way and needs to get out. But that is it for the news. Go check out our viewpoints. We have one from Ted Snyder. China, the rock upon which the U.S.-led alliance breaks. That's over at the Libertarian Institute. We have one from Jonathan Cook. Israel's long war between the generals and extremists is not going away. We have one from Eli Clifton and Ben Freeman. Pro bono Ukraine lobbyists quietly profit from defense contractor clients. That is over at Responsible Statecraft. We have one from Nick Terse. After 2 decades of U.S. military support, terror attacks are worse than ever in Niger. So this is, you should always check out Terse's work because he's one of the few journalists that really pays attention to, AFRICOM and U.S. operations in Africa. And then our spotlight is from Alex Rubenstein over at the Gray Zone. Legitimate target. Bellingcat defends the terror attack at the St. Petersburg Cafe. So they're calling this guy who's a military, they call him a blogger and a war correspondent, which, sounds like he was a journalist and he did support Russia's war. But, this line of thinking is a very dangerous, slippery slope, especially for the hawks in the West that support, American wars and interventions, to say that, killing somebody like this is a legitimate target. Anyway, that's everything. You could always support the show, antiwar.com/donate. Share it around. Tell your friends about it. Tell everybody about antiwar.com. That's it for me for today. I'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.